My girlfriend said, "I'm going off birth control without telling you. If I get pregnant, it's meant to be." During an argument, I said, "That's reproductive coercion." Then I scheduled a vasectomy for the following week and moved out. When she announced her pregnancy 3 months later, and I sent her my medical records, I, 28 male, am a pretty average guy working in logistics, just trying to build a quiet, stable life. At the time all this went down, I was living in a rented apartment with girlfriend. We had been together for 2 years, but the last 6 months have been a steep downhill slide. Things were so rocky between us that we had been sleeping in separate rooms and hadn't been intimate in over 2 months. The air in our place always felt heavy, like a storm was constantly brewing, just waiting for an excuse to break. We were arguing almost every day, mostly because we wanted completely different things out of life. I wanted to pay down our debts and maybe go camping for the weekend. She wanted an all-inclusive resort in Mexico, a designer ring, a house we couldn't afford, and above all, she wanted a baby immediately. It all came to a head on a Tuesday evening. I was standing in the kitchen, scraping congealed pasta sauce off a plate, just trying to zone out. Girlfriend started in on a vacation budget again, which predictably spiraled into her timeline for our future. I was completely drained. I calmly reiterated what I had been saying for months. I told her that our constant bickering, our massive credit card debt, and the fact that we were barely acting like a couple meant we were nowhere near ready to bring a child into the world. She stood leaning against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed. Her entire demeanor changed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by an eerie, calculating calm. She looked right at me and dropped the mask completely. She told me that it didn't really matter what I thought. She looked me dead in the eyes and said she was going off her birth control without telling me, and if she got pregnant, it was meant to be. The kitchen went dead silent. The running water from the faucet was the only sound in the room. I set the plate down slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. I looked at her and said that what she just threatened was reproductive coercion. I told her it was illegal in some places and completely sick everywhere else. Girlfriend actually rolled her eyes and scoffed at me. She told me to stop being dramatic and said I would be happy when it happened because everyone is scared at first. She turned around and walked into the bedroom, completely unbothered by the sheer violation she had just casually promised. She genuinely believed she was entitled to the exact life she had mapped out in her head, and she assumed I was just a background character who would eventually fall in line. She assumed I was trapped. She left the next morning for a 3-day weekend girls trip. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I picked up my phone and set my escape plan in motion. First, I called a private urology clinic in the city. I bypassed my standard insurance because I knew the approval process and mandatory waiting periods would take too long, and I needed this done immediately to protect myself. I asked the receptionist for the absolute earliest appointment for a vasectomy. I told her I was paying cash out of pocket and would take any cancellation spot they had. A guy had just backed out a Friday morning slot, and I locked it down. Next, I called my landlord. The lease was in both our names, but I offered to pay the 2-month penalty fee up front, entirely out of my own savings to break my half of the contract. The landlord lived on the first floor. He was a decent, observant guy who had heard our screaming matches through the vents more than once. When I went downstairs with the cashier's check, he saw the absolute desperation in my eyes. He didn't ask questions. He just printed the release paperwork and signed it. I spent Thursday packing every single thing I owned. I rented a storage unit across town and moved all my furniture, electronics, and clothes while girlfriend was miles away posting pictures of herself drinking margaritas by a pool. I left her belongings exactly where they were. I didn't touch a single thing of hers. I left my half of the rent for the remainder of the month in cash on the kitchen island. Next to the money, I left my apartment key. On Friday morning, I drove myself to the clinic. I walked in, signed a massive stack of consent forms, and lay back on the table. The procedure was fast. It was uncomfortable, sure, but the physical sting was absolutely nothing compared to the massive weight lifting off my chest. I drove to my buddy's place, where I had secured a spot in his spare bedroom, laid down with a bag of frozen peas, and finally exhaled for the first time in months. Girlfriend returned to the apartment on Sunday evening. My phone started vibrating on the nightstand at exactly 6 in the evening. First came the confusion. She texted asking where the couch was and where all my clothes went. Then came the absolute rage. She called me 22 times in the span of an hour. I didn't answer a single one. I blocked her number entirely. By Monday morning, she had mobilized her family. Girlfriend possessed a terrifying level of entitlement. She honestly believed the world owed her everything she wanted, and my leaving was a personal crime against reality. Girlfriend's mother called my cell phone. When I didn't answer, she actually looked at my company's directory and called my workplace. My boss is a strict, no-nonsense guy who values efficiency over everything. Girlfriend's mother demanded to speak to him, claiming I was having a severe mental breakdown and was financially abusing her daughter by abandoning our home. My boss pulled me into his office and closed the door. He told me some woman was screaming at the front desk receptionist over the phone about my relationship, and he told me to make it stop immediately before human resources got involved. The humiliation was intense. I had to briefly explain the situation to my boss, who thankfully understood and had security block the number, but girlfriend wasn't done. She started a massive smear campaign on social media. She posted long, tearful paragraphs about how I walked out on her, without a word because I was terrified of commitment and lacked basic manhood. She painted herself as the ultimate victim, a devoted and loving partner blindsided by a coward. I ignored it all. I knew engaging would only give her what she wanted. Then came the dirty tricks. On Wednesday night, I was looking out the window of my friend's ground floor apartment. Girlfriend had somehow tracked down where I was staying. I watched from the dark window as she walked into the parking lot, marched straight up to my car, pulled a key from her pocket, and dragged it down the entire length of the driver's side door. I didn't run outside. I didn't scream or confront her. I just quietly recorded her on my phone, making sure to get a clear shot of her face under the street lamp as she did it. The next morning, still walking with a slight limp from the surgery, I went straight to the police precinct. I filed a report for vandalism and handed over the video file. I then went to the county courthouse and filed for a restraining order. In my state, you need to prove a pattern of harassment or a credible threat to get protective order granted. I presented the police report for the vandalism, the phone records showing the logs of 70 block calls, and a sworn, notarized statement from my workplace regarding her mother's unhinged interference. The judge granted the temporary order immediately. A sheriff's deputy served her the paperwork at her workplace the following afternoon. 2 weeks later, at the hearing, the judge reviewed the video of her keying my car and made the order permanent for a full year. The silence that followed was absolute. No calls, no drive-bys, no social media posts. The legal boundary had finally forced her to back off. I spent the next 12 weeks healing, throwing myself into my work and resetting my life. I went to all my follow-up medical appointments and followed the doctor's orders strictly. Life was peaceful. It was almost too peaceful. I should have known someone with her level of entitlement was just reloading her weapons. 3 months passed. It was exactly 92 days since I walked out of that apartment. I had my final post-op appointment at the urology clinic earlier that week. The doctor reviewed my semen analysis. The results were definitive. 0 sperm count. I was medically cleared. I was officially and permanently sterile. I folded the lab result document, put it in my safe, and felt a profound sense of relief that the nightmare was truly over. 2 days later, the bomb dropped. I received a thick, certified letter in the mail. It was from a family law attorney in the city. I opened it at my kitchen table, my heart pounding a little despite knowing I was safe. It was a formal demand letter. It stated that girlfriend was 12 weeks pregnant. The letter demanded I begin paying half of her prenatal medical expenses immediately, demanded I sign an agreement for a massive amount of monthly child support, and threatened a highly public paternity lawsuit upon the child's birth if I didn't comply. Included in the envelope was a glossy photocopy of an ultrasound. Simultaneously, my phone started exploding with notifications. I was getting texts from my mother, my brother, and people I hadn't spoken to since high school. Girlfriend had cleverly bypassed a restraining order by making a massive public Facebook post. She wrote a whole sob story saying the hardest journeys are walked alone. She announced she was beyond terrified, but so blessed to be expecting a baby. She said it broke her heart that the father had chosen to run away from his responsibilities in the middle of the night, but promised her baby would know nothing but love. She actually tagged my family members in the comments, so they would be forced to see it. She orchestrated a masterpiece of manipulation. She knew the restraining order prevented her from contacting me directly, so she used a lawyer to threaten me legally and used the public square to destroy me socially. My mother called me, crying hysterically, asking how I could just leave a pregnant woman, and demanding I step up and be a man. I told my mother to take a deep breath and trust me. I told her I had the entire situation completely handled and hung up. I sat down and looked at the calendar. 12 weeks. She was claiming she was 12 weeks pregnant. I counted backward. 12 weeks ago was exactly the week we had that massive argument in the kitchen. It was the week she went on her girls' trip. It was the week I moved out. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. She didn't just threaten to go off birth control during that argument. She had already been off it. Furthermore, we hadn't even slept together for over 2 months prior to that argument because our relationship was so toxic. There was zero biological possibility that I could be the father even before the vasectomy. She was actively trying to trap me, or she was already cheating on me and needed a convenient fall guy when she realized she missed her period. The sheer audacity and entitlement were staggering. She firmly believed she could force me into a lifetime of financial compliance and parental obligation purely through public shame and terrifying legal threats. She thought she held all the cards. She thought I was just a cornered animal who would eventually cave under the massive pressure of family expectations and court summons. She had no idea what I had done on that Friday morning 3 months ago. I didn't reply to her lawyer right away. I let her stew in her false victory for a full week. I let her continue posting baby registry links online and soaking up all the sympathy from her friends and my confused family. Then, I hired a brutal, highly rated civil litigation attorney. I sat in his office and handed him the demand letter from girlfriend's lawyer. Then, I handed him a manila folder containing my medical records, my zero-count clearance, and a timeline proving we hadn't been intimate in the months leading up to the breakup. My lawyer reviewed the timeline. He looked at the date of the vasectomy. He looked at the date of the zero-count clearance. He looked up at me and smiled a very terrifying, completely professional smile. He told me she had severely miscalculated her target. We drafted a response. We didn't just decline her demands. We completely decimated them. My lawyer sent a heavy, certified package to her attorney. Inside was a copy of my vasectomy surgical records, dated perfectly to contradict her timeline of conception, along with the recent lab results proving absolute sterility. The letter plainly stated that any further attempts to extort money for a child that was biologically impossible to be mine would be met with severe legal consequences. But I wasn't going to let her control the public narrative while I won quietly in the background. She wanted a public spectacle, so I decided to give her one she would never forget. I went home and drafted a simple email. I attached the PDF of the aggressive demand letter she sent me, demanding money for my supposed child. Below it, I attached the PDF of my post-vasectomy clearance. I redacted my social security number and private details, but left my name, the clinic's name, the date, and the word 0 highlighted in bright yellow highlighter. I sent it to girlfriend. I carbon copied girlfriend's mother, girlfriend's father, her sister, and the 5 mutual friends who had been harassing me online on her behalf. The body of the email was completely professional. I wrote that I received her legal demand for child support. I stated that given we had not been intimate for months prior to our breakup, and given that I underwent a vasectomy the exact week I moved out and had been medically cleared as sterile, this child was biologically impossible to be mine. I told her to direct all future correspondence to my attorney, as we were currently preparing to file a civil lawsuit against her for defamation, malicious legal threats, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The fallout was nuclear and instantaneous. Her family, who had been fiercely defending her honor and attacking my character, suddenly realized they had been weaponized in a massive, embarrassing fraud. Her mother, who had literally tried to get me fired from my job, sent me a frantic, rambling apology email begging me not to sue them. I deleted it without even reading the whole thing. Girlfriend tried to backtrack desperately. She told her family the timeline was just a guess, that maybe it was a medical miracle. My lawyer shut that delusion down immediately by sending a formal cease and desist letter to her house. Through the grapevine, the absolute truth finally surfaced. That weekend girls' trip she went on 3 months ago wasn't just a trip with her friends. Her ex-boyfriend lived in that specific city. She had secretly reconnected with him. She was actively cheating, got pregnant, and tried to pin the massive financial burden on me because her ex-boyfriend was chronically unemployed, broke, and still living in his parents' basement. My retaliation didn't stop at just exposing her lies. We proceeded with the civil suits. I sued her for the damages to my car in small claims court and won a default judgment easily when she was too ashamed to even show up to the hearing. We pursued the defamation case aggressively because she had intentionally contacted my employer with false statements that could have damaged my professional reputation and caused me to lose my income. We had incredibly strong grounds for defamation per se. She was completely cornered and forced to settle out of court to avoid a highly public, humiliating trial. Part of the strict settlement agreement required her to post a formal public retraction on her social media accounts, explicitly admitting she had lied about me being the father of her child and apologizing for the harassment. She lost her entire support system. She lost her reputation in our social circle. She was left deeply in debt from her own mounting legal fees, the settlement she had to pay me, and the judgment from my car door. She found herself completely tied to a deadbeat ex-boyfriend, preparing to raise a child in the exact chaotic, financially unstable environment she had tried so hard to force me to subsidize. She played a dirty, highly entitled game, and the very real consequences completely crushed her. Walking away from that mess was the absolute most empowering thing I have ever done in my life.